when we talk about grief, so there's something called disenfranchised grief, and that things like divorce, miscarriage, pet loss, breakups, like all of that fall into this category. And we, at least traditionally, would think of grief when it comes to bereavement, when it comes to, losing someone to death. But really, like, we experience grief in any of those examples mentioned, and many, many more. And disenfranchised grief is when, yes, society doesn't really give us like the love and the leeway and the support that we need. And oh my gosh, like I think for anyone who has or has had a pet, like, it is excruciating to lose a pet. Like, it is equally as difficult as losing a person, in my opinion. I mean, I will say, I shared with you offline that I lost my mom a little over 4 months ago, quite suddenly. And it's been a very difficult, very, very difficult journey. And it's sort of, I got married a couple weeks ago, and up until that point, I felt like I could really like put it on ice and focus on the wedding. But right after that ended, like, I just got hit with a tsunami. But I will say that there are elements of the grief of losing my mom, like one of the most important relationships in my life, that are easier than going through the heartbreaks that I went through with my husband before we ultimately got married. And wow. I, again, they're different in many ways, but, grieving the loss of a person to death, you don't have the same kind of, or I don't at least have the same kind of anxiety and hope, right? Because you can't have hope anymore. When a person dies, there's a little stage of denial often people might go through depending on the circumstances, but ultimately you recognize like, okay, I just have to keep like trudging through this heaviness and this pain. Whereas when you lose a relationship, to heartbreak or to a breakup, not only do you deal with like the hope and the anxiety that comes along with that. Anxiety is kind of a motivating emotion that tells us we need to do something, but we're also dealing with rejection. Like, and rejection fucking sucks. Like, rejection and shame and all of these feelings that are like, oh, like, I'm unwanted, I'm unlovable, and like, this was my fault and I failed. So yes, with bereavement grief, I mean, don't get me wrong, like, I've got all sorts of like guilt and feelings that I'm working through and questioning, and I should have done this and I should have done that, and beating myself up, and I wish I hadn't said this thing and whatnot. But I will say that it's more peaceful in some ways than the excruciating pain of heartbreak. Not to mention with heartbreak, at least, if you've been together with somebody for some time and you're living with them, you're also dealing with like really significant transitions in your life. Like, you're having to move out, you're having to get used to sleeping by yourself. You're having to like, say goodbye to a group of friends that you might have had, that were kind of your friends as a couple. That's why I think it's so important to maintain separate friends. You're getting used to a new identity, which is as a single person. And you're not just grieving everything that you went through, but you're also grieving the future, right? Like, the relationship you believed you were going to have, the father or mother of your children, that person you're going to be sitting on the porch with in the rocking chair, until you're 95 or whatever it is. And so there is so much. I mean, I really, having been through a couple of very challenging heartbreaks myself, I don't think we give heartbreak enough credit for just how painful it is. And I think, we really dismiss it. And even when we're the ones to end the relationship, it's interesting. Like, I, as I said, have had my heart broken a number of times with really excruciating heartbreaks that were truly transformative, because it's also a huge spiritual opportunity. But I actually did my master's research on leaving relationships based on my experience being the person who ended the relationship, a challenging relationship.
Why did you not lead with that?
Yeah, I know.
I didn't know that.
I kind of buried the lead there. But yes, that was but yeah, I mean, that was honestly like, gosh, what year was that? That was 2010. So it's been a while since that happened. But either way, the reason
hold on. Relationships still end, don't they?
Sorry?
I think that research is still relevant.
Yes, exactly. Yes, totally. But the whole reason there was because, and I focus primarily on women, just because women have a lot more pressure to kind of be like nurturing and relational. So there's just that much more guilt we feel when we break someone's heart. And so that can be really met with not only feeling so much guilt and shame, but also being vilified, right? Like, being perceived as this person who's selfish, or, well, wait, like, what was wrong? They're just, why would they leave? They just abandoned their partner. And of course that goes both ways. I mean, I experienced that too. But ultimately, why I share this is because whether we're the person who ends the relationship or is broken up with, and even when we're the one who ends with the relationship, sometimes we're doing that because we're like, well, I mean, this person's like throwing the game here, like, they're not even trying anymore, I have to end this relationship because the other person is sabotaging it. So I don't think it's necessarily a factor of how much effort one's putting in the relationship, whether you end it or not, or how rejected one feels, whether they end it or not. But either way, wherever we are in the end of a relationship, it is deeply, deeply painful. And there are so many layers to it. And as your friend said, it takes as long as it takes. There's no timeline. There are things we can do to kind of slow it down. And there are things that we can do to support ourselves better throughout the process. But it is sort of a rite of passage that most people will go through at some point in their lives. And ultimately, I believe it can be an opportunity for spiritual growth and self-compassion and, connecting more deeply to kind of like our own wants and needs and desires and recognizing what we do need in relationship with somebody moving forward.